Brickit is an AI camera app where you lay out all of your Legos. It scans every piece, every shape, and it comes up with hundreds, yes, I did say hundreds, hundreds of ideas of different things that you can build with Legos. Problem solved. My son is happy, I'm happy. It's the best thing ever. Look it up, Brickit. You can come talk to me later if you forget it in the session. But this is the innovation that I love. As a mom, as a head of product in our provider business unit, I am constantly looking for innovations that make the lives of my children, of myself, and for all of our customers out there better. This is what gets me up every single day.
She's also a venture capital investor in Brickit, so but
this is disclaimer.
She forgot that disclosure at the beginning, but
yeah.
no, I'm kidding. She's not.
But Todd,
as far as I know.
Yeah, maybe. Todd is also someone who is extremely passionate about innovation. So
Absolutely.
Todd, why don't you share a little bit about your passion?
Sure. So Todd Crosslin, I think my passion starts from a early age of being, I guess, exposed to data in a variety of ways. I probably the most thing that really I think brought me to being the. I have a few fellow data geeks back there that we talk about a lot. I was in New York and working with Dwayne Reed, which is now part of Walgreens, and I was working with their head of pharmacy, and he was really frustrated that his pharmacists were not properly coding some claims. No. Like, never heard of this, right? And this was I'm going to age myself, it was 96, I think, 96, 97. And he's like, hey, can you write a report that says, this sounds like a SQL statement, right? Like, look at claims for this payer that don't have this, and the claim reimbursement amount was 50% lower, or all this kind of stuff. I was like, okay. So I went and figured it out. And I'm like, and then I couldn't figure out why other people couldn't do that. And it's kind of a thing, right? When you're a data geek, some people get it and some people don't. And so I filled it out, and we ran the report. And when we first ran it, I think Dwayne Reed had 130 pharmacies at the time. And it was about 10 pages of incorrect billing on and it was a dot matrix printer. Okay?
Yes.
So that was good. And so printed on a dot matrix printer, and it had the pharmacy number, the claim, and then, of course, the prescription number, really important. And then the pharmacist that was responsible, right, for that claim, even though it could have been the tech. I'm a former pharmacy technician, probably my fault, never the pharmacist's fault, right? So, and so we went through this list, and it had the phone number right of the pharmacy. And so every morning when he came in, and he would get on, and he would get the printout from the prior day, in the beginning, because it was 10 pages, it took him 2.5 hours, and then 2 weeks later, he had a half a page. That was it, because that's the power of analytics and like the ability to impact change, and a big part of what we're going to talk about is culture, right? And how do you bring artificial intelligence to the masses, and how do you engage people and all of that? And a lot of this is culture change, right? Let's do things that maybe we're not comfortable with, but our job is to hopefully make people a lot more comfortable with AI. But for me, that was it's been a huge impact on my life, just to see, how seriously he took that as part of his job. But what he did is he up-leveled his staff, and they all knew that, Big Brother was watching in a very, and I listened to him, and he's like very respectful, right? But he made it very clear, like, the expectations are, we're going to do this stuff right, and I'm watching. Yeah. And it was just while it sounds so simple today, I think it was a very powerful thing in my career. And then that led me to, suddenly they're like, oh, you ran this one report, we'll call it. And they're like, oh, you want to build 10 more? And the rest is history. So.
And you're right. We're going to spend some time talking about how not only AI is for the masses, but AI is everywhere. By a show of hands, how many people traveled by airplane to get here? Okay. How many of you did not use a boarding pass to get through security? Almost half of the room. It's facial recognition technology. It's using your driver's license. 15 years ago, if somebody said, you're going to get through security without a boarding pass, you probably would have looked at them like they were crazy, right? But there are tons of examples all around us where AI is streamlining our processes, is creating innovation in ways that we never really thought possible. But before we get too deep, let's just take a step back and start with the basics. So Todd, what is AI, and what are some areas that you see benefiting from AI? Otherwise, I'll go through 10 more examples.
That's right, and keep going. Yeah. So I think one thing to recognize, and I'm going to start with, don't forget about the stepchild that is machine learning. I think that having been part of healthcare life sciences for over 30 years, and I have some tremendous peers in other industries, one of the things we recognize is that healthcare and life, we tend to be a little bit of a late adopter. So I've been fortunate enough, having been at Snowflake now for 6 years and then a CIO prior to that, and being interested in other industries, is really watching how machine learning was adopted and then now how AI is adopted. And I think the key there is it's important for us to recognize the differences between the two. I won't spend hours trying to explain the technical differences between the two, but I think the key here is the one thing to know about AI is that it's not perfect, and that's something that I get to work with our customers on and dig into the details of running a large language model and doing generative AI and what have you. And so that's kind of where AI is today. But don't forget about machine learning and how valuable that can be to an organization. And what we've done, and this is won't be a commercial for Snowflake, but cloud computing in general, we've said we need to bring machine learning, we need to bring AI to the masses, right? How do we enable, right, your analyst like me, who's a SQL novice, I would say, right? I've never spent the time with SQL. I've always been using business intelligence tools. How do we bring that to the masses? And what's happened, and we were super focused on this, is we're going to make Gen AI and large language models accessible to an analyst, but we're also going to bring machine learning, right, to the masses as well. And that was a very conscious decision. And I think I've seen that in the industry as well, is that there's no reason why. We've come far enough from a technology perspective that there's no reason why we can't bring those to the masses. So.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's interesting because I think whenever there's something new, whenever there's a big change coming, there's a fear. There's a bit of that anxiety of the unknown of how do I jump in? How do I learn this? I'm not a data scientist, but the reality is AI can be for everyone. And we spent some time talking to about 400 healthcare professionals out there, and what we found was about 25% were skeptic that there was any opportunity kind of in a revenue cycle capacity. And another 25% said, you know what, I'm just not sure about how I would apply it, right? So not that they're for it, they're against it, I just can't imagine what a use case would be. And I think that really points back to the need of how do you start to kind of break down some of that fear of the unknown? How do you start with the education and make AI something that people think about of, I want to experiment, I want to try. And at Inovalon, I take this into our business and rev cycle, and you can take a process like eligibility. Eligibility is not new, right? Eligibility is been around. Oh, eligibility is exciting, Todd. It's a traditional process that's been around in healthcare, right? But when you start to think about, well, how could we make that process better, right? How could we make it so that you don't need to have manual inputs and entry, or the data isn't always perfect, right? In a ER setting, you're not always going to have every piece of information. How do you use technology to innovate and really make sure that you can bring in that streamlined process without having to introduce that friction to the process?
Yeah. So. Yeah, I know. For me, kind of stage 2 career-wise, right? So it was the pharmacist miscoding, and then I fast forward to about 6 or 7 years ago, and being a pharmacy background, outpatient retail pharmacy, specialty pharmacy is kind of big, right? There's a little bit of money that's involved in specialty these days, and even back then. And we had implemented Snowflake, and we implemented Looker on top of it, and I knew how important it was when you look at a claim. If you do a claim incorrectly in specialty, it can have a very significant financial impact. And so I had a thought. I had a hypothesis. What if I did anomaly detection, right, on specialty pharmacy claims, and what would that garner? I didn't have a specific thing I was looking for, but this is where you start to get into ML and AI. And so I was like, it was ML back then, but it was like recognize, and so I'll keep the story short, is that it took me a week to figure out how to create anomaly detection, and I'm technical enough to be dangerous, my guys know that, and so now, and I did that, and our organizations loved it, and they were like, hey, can we get this? And so we gave it to them, and the numbers, revenue cycle, it was significant. It wasn't $10, like $10,000 per claim in a lot of cases where something was done incorrectly. So fast forward, and now inside cloud platforms like Snowflake, and I literally created the same thing. It took me 5 minutes. So I think that's the point to get across, is that whether you want to utilize a large language model, or you want to do anomaly detection, or you want to do forecasting, okay? Those three things I just said, in your head right now you're thinking, data scientist, data scientist, data scientist. Like, where's my data scientist? Are there any data scientists in here? Because I'm going to be really, hopefully not, nobody? All right, I can be really mean. No, I'm just kidding. So we joke that like data scientists we don't have large language models and transformer models and base models and all that without the data scientist. But there's not enough of them to be engaging with them on a daily basis, but we now have an ability to say, I've got the technology at my fingertips to go in and say, my favorite examples, I want to run sentiment analysis on a big chunk of unstructured data. That used to be a big deal. Like, that was a 3-month project. You grab the data scientists, go start training and all of that. Today, it's one line of code inside platforms like Snowflake. So don't be intimidated. I think that's what we were kind of talking about, like we want people to walk out of here with, is that AI and ML should not be intimidating to anybody in this room. It doesn't matter how technical you are, how non-technical you are. The tools are to a point now where you can go in and engage it and take advantage of these type of capabilities, and you don't have to be a data scientist, right? Again, they don't exist without them, right? But you don't have to be one to utilize it. So I think that's a huge part.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So you raised the point of saying, hey, you don't have a mass of data scientists out there. Well, when we think about healthcare, right, staffing challenges are persisting throughout the industry. And that is a perfect situation to start thinking about, how can I drive automation into some of those workflows and the processes? Because you don't have an abundance of staff. You don't have people lying around or sitting around waiting for, oh gee, I'm gonna wait for the next patient to come in and I have nothing to do, right? And so that's a perfect opportunity within healthcare to really start thinking about what are those processes that could really benefit from automation. And I'd be remiss if I didn't tie this back to, it's not just about the benefits of the software and the system, but it's about the patients, right? I mean, we talked about it earlier, but we all got into healthcare not for the money, not for the, it's for improving that experience for the patient and really starting to think about, I'll reflect back, my son a few years ago was playing at the dinner table, he was extra wiggly, and before we knew it, he had a giant gash across his forehead, bleeding everywhere, and you panic. And I'm a mom first, right? Ran out the door. Did I think about taking my insurance card? No. Did I think about
I thought you ran out the door without him.
Oh, well, I tell him how to bring him, but I ran out the door. I wasn't thinking about, oh my gosh, what information do I need to put into the system, and how am I gonna pay, and where is that claim gonna go? I was thinking about my son, right? And in those moments, in that experience, patients aren't thinking about, well, what do they need? What do I need for this payment? Or, gosh, afterwards, am I going to be on the phone calling the insurance company, disputing this bill, having to pay money out of pocket? And so that's when we think about the opportunity for automation in healthcare, it's really bringing it back to that patient experience. How do you make that experience better for the patient and better for the staff who are sitting there and want to make that patient feel at ease during a care journey? Because if a patient is there to receive care, there's something going on in their lives that is creating stress. And so the last thing that you want on their mind is, oh gosh, if I don't get this, did I remember? Like, you just don't want to place that extra burden. And those are opportunities that excite me when you think about, what's on that next curve of innovation. What opportunities do you see, Todd, that could be ripe for that automation?
I mean, I'll tell the story in the, there's the good story, and then there's the unfortunate consequences of the good story, right? So if I say, I want to like take a video of everybody, and when I say the words appeals process, like, right? It's like,
bring the puppies back in.
That's right, yeah, bring the puppies, yeah, like melancholy sits over the audience as I say appeals. And one of the beautiful things I've seen, Gen AI do is to take an appeals process, on the payment integrity side, and like, ooh, I can get an appeal and I can have Gen AI summarize it for me, right? And so that's on the payment integrity side. Then on the revenue cycle management side, they're like, ooh, I've got to do an appeal. I can have Gen AI create my appeal document, so I don't have to. Isn't this amazing? Like I automated it, right? So I've literally had these two conversations on the two sides, right? And that's a valid use case for Gen AI, absolutely, right? It's going to save time. It's going to do all the things that we've talked about. So do you know where step 2 is on this? You get where this is going, right? So you have Gen AI on one side, you have Gen AI on the other side, and what do? They meet in the middle. So we now jokingly call it battle the bots, right? So from that perspective, I don't know of that crossover. It's like Ghostbusters, age myself again, like crossing the streams. Like that's happening out there. And so I think it's a good thing that you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to use Gen AI to do this. And so, I'm going to do this, and we're going to make the appeals process more efficient. I've had this conversation with a few organizations, and they're like, maybe we should rethink the appeals process. Here's a thought. And I do think with value-based care and going at risk together, I think that's creating a better environment to relook at. I'm on my high horse around value-based care, but that's kind of where, like, my job, I can't help it. Like, I had to laugh when I was at the revenue cycle management one first, and I was like, oh, this is a great story for appeals. And then I show up at payment integrity, and I'm like, wait a minute. Like, really? Y'all seriously going to do this? You're going to have battle of the bots here? And I had to laugh, right? I was like, that's insane. It's a absolutely valid use case, and it will bring automation. It will make things more efficient. Yep. But what does that mean in the end, right? Is there possibly a better way, right, to do that? So I hope that that's what this kind of leads to, is it forces us to rethink our processes and potentially come at it in a different way. And I think going at risk together probably is going to help that.
Yeah,
so,
entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah, much like appeals, I feel like if I say the word denials, we get a few people who just put their heads down and don't look up.
Or just bolt.
Yeah, maybe. But when denials is another great example within kind of that revenue cycle space. And when we think about that process today, we understand, we're looking at the patterns that are creating those denials. And we're watching them. And then we're saying, oh, okay, well, here's all the reasons why these claims got denied. And okay, we're going to have somebody go back, and we're going to try to go back and forth, and the reimbursement timeline keeps getting longer and longer and longer. Well, why not look at how to predict that? Why not look at those patterns and say, instead of us doing something after the fact and reacting to the denial, why not take that step forward? Let's look for those patterns. How do we predict what's going to happen and prevent that denial up front? Put that into the predictive editing before that claim is ever being submitted, right? Opportunities like that where, again, how many staff do we have across health systems that are just dedicated to working those denials? So there's tons of great opportunities like that. I know we've talked through a few. Any other examples you would want to call out for the audience?
I think the point, and I think what's happening and us recognizing, we've talked about 80% of the data in healthcare is unstructured and this, that, and the other. Like, that's been a talking point for decades. It's like, guess what? You can do something with, it is legitimate, it is, and people have been, don't get me wrong, but I think what it is that we're taking that 80% now, and we were probably getting value out of 5% of it. Right, people were able to figure out how to do a model and predict pneumonia from a DICOM image. Yes, check. Right, we're and extracting medical information to look at billing and what have you. But now, the opportunity is there's no excuse. right? The platforms now are at a point where you can take any type of unstructured data. If you're, I mean, look at ambient AI, look at what's going on with the bridge and in that space, if you're familiar with providers and Epic, physicians shouldn't have to type. I mean, some of them, have you seen some physicians? I'm just kidding. I don't want to offend any physician. No.
Look like my husband's handwriting.
Yeah, or when they write, right? So it should be that the physician, a clinician, nurse, whomever, should be in a room with a patient and just having an interaction, and that should be captured, right? And it's now happening. So that's why I say there's no excuses. Is that digital? I get excited about digital pathology. I think it's tremendous what the opportunities lie in that area from a clinical perspective, and what that means and what will happen in that space. I think is going to be amazing for that. But I guess that's my point. It's look to Inovalon as they're obviously working with us, and that's our goal, is to bring this to our common customers and say, we're giving you the opportunity to take advantage of these technologies, and there's no excuse why not, right? So I think that's what we're trying to do.
I like it. All right, we're gonna one last question, and then I'm sure there's tons of questions. That's your lead-in to get some questions ready. Yep. What advice would you have? We've got people in this room, people outside of this room who are at all different stages of their journey on kind of exploration with AI. Yep. What advice would you have for folks in the room?
Yep. So while there is no excuse, there is also don't be foolish, right, with it. And what I mean by that, I was asked this, and I bought a new bicycle, and I wanted to. It was not inexpensive, so it's like I'm going to keep it in the house. So I needed a piece of furniture, shall we say, to mount the bike on. And so I was putting it together, and I was reading the instructions. And so we've all probably put together some type of furniture at some IKEA, otherwise, or whatever. And what's the first line of the instructions? Don't tighten all the bolts. We know why that is, right? Because if you get 3/4 of the way through it, or 9/10, and then suddenly it says step 10, and you still have 20 pieces, then obviously you've made a huge mistake, right? It's a lot more difficult to undo it. If you've tightened all the bolts, it's going to be very difficult, right, to do that. So that was kind of the advice, and the mental picture is that don't go into using, and this is where I make my Snowflake friends and my salespeople nervous, right? Don't tighten the bolt. Experiment with all these tools. You should expect anyone that is able to provide you with tools like this with a mechanism to experiment, right? And if you've been following Gen AI and LLMs, we get a new one out every week, right? So just know that new capabilities are coming out very, very frequently. So it's kind of looking at it two different ways. Is that don't tighten it all the way down, but look at it from a value perspective and say, now with cloud technologies, you can say, I've got an issue with payment integrity in the appeals process. I'm going to go use Gen AI and LLMs, and I'm going to go make this appeals process better. Go for it. But don't think that don't think that you're going to take that model and then apply it to every other problem that you have. And I think that's some of the beauty of cloud computing, is that you don't have to. It's in the olden days of data warehouses, you bought this massive hardware appliance for millions of dollars, and that was it. And the IT budget said, that's what you've got for the next 2 years, right? You don't have you're not going to get any more compute, no more storage, right? Lots of discussion this morning about compute and storage. And that's it, and you're stuck with it, right? Now, as long as you have an ROI, and this gets to my last point, is that, right, no excuses, experiment at scale, execute it in an iterative way, get the value, right? But then recognizing that you have an infinite amount of resources in cloud, infinite, near infinite, but that also requires that you have to have an ROI, right? So what I'm seeing out there is that it's a mentality shift of, I made a payment of $2 million, I can do whatever I want with this machine, I'm just gonna burn it up and use it, and that's how ROIs were done. Now it's no, you wanna go do something, you wanna do appeals process summarization, right? Then what's the ROI? And that's where I get pulled in a lot of having those conversations. They come, I'm told I have to use Gen AI. For what, right? And where are your pain points and what problems are you trying to solve? Let's go create the ROI. And you can, and that's, again, a beauty here is that in a matter of days, even hours sometimes, you can figure out if you have an ROI. And if you don't, skip it for now. Maybe you'll come back to it when it makes sense, but establish your ROI, then go and execute. So I think that's the big shift from the way things used to be, and being a former CIO and dealing with big hardware purchases, it's just a different world from that.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head, right? I think don't go in and say, I've got to use AI. Like, where should I put AI, right? It's more, what problems am I trying to solve, right? What are the areas? I go back to my Legos example. I was spending too much money on Legos, and my son was bored after 2 hours, right? Thinking about those problems in your everyday work and your everyday life, and thinking about, how could I think about solving for this problem differently? How could I use technology? How could I use AI to make this inefficient process or this inefficient behavior better? And then start to solution. And we've talked a lot about, I think it's really important to have that understanding of what it is that you're trying to solve for. What area is it that you're trying to improve? And then I think I would just continue to reinforce the one point that you said. Don't expect perfection day one. By nature, continuous learning, continuous evolution of that model, the more data that gets fed in, the more that model will learn, the more that it will evolve. But don't go in and say, oh gosh, day one, if I didn't hit that 100% improvement, like this was a failure, and give up. It's about investing and kind of continually thinking through this problem. Every day, problems are evolving within the healthcare system, right? You think you've solved for one, oh, ICD-9, then ICD-10, and it's, oh boy, it's constantly changing, right? And that's how technology can adapt with those changes and help in evolving. So experiment often. Don't expect perfection, but have an idea of what it is that you're trying to solve for. And now you guys are all ready to go do AI,
That's right.
We're done. Job's done, right?
Yep. I've got my laptop if anybody wants to try it. No,
Yeah.
I mean, but really, we can do that. That's the beauty of this, is that ability is quick. I joke with we have account executives and sales engineers, right? Sales engineers are there to be the technical folks to get into all the technical discussions. I joke now, and I'm not joking. I'm looking at my guys.
They're laughing at you.
Yeah, I know, they are. Account executives can now demo on Snowflake. So when I joined Snowflake 6 years ago, it was a SQL user interface, right? Like, you got to write SQL. And so now, today, fast forward, I can build a forecast model or an anomaly model myself through a wizard, and there's no reason why any of our account executives can't do that, right? You don't have to be technical at all. It's following the steps. Now, you have to have subject matter, got to know your data, right? In the end, subject matter expertise is crucial. But I love the fact that there's no excuse there. It's kind of fun.
I love it. Yep. All right, I think we have a little bit of time for questions. So anybody have any questions?
Who's going to be first?
Who's excited to go home and try AI?
Oh. Go ahead, John.
I'm waiting for the microphone.
Oh, okay. You're
Because he's quiet.
That's what because you're so quiet. Yeah.
So Todd, you cross a lot of industries. I was just curious, since healthcare sometimes is slow to adapt, right? Technology, particularly AI, is an interesting one because of governance and things like that.
Right.
What learnings have you found from other industries that maybe could translate into healthcare?
So I think it's just that. I think that I was going back to the experimentation. I think it's back to the experimentation. We are sometimes so afraid of doing things unless we've seen, best example in the world, and if someone wants me to explain this more in the future, but data clean rooms. So data clean rooms are the mechanism that came out of media and advertising in order for two entities to share data without actually sharing data. If that sounds wild, it is. But what you do is you share attributes, and so it's a very, very powerful mechanism in technology that has been in media and advertising for 2 years, right? And part of my job is to be the tip of the spear, as you know. And so so I have these conversations with global life sciences and global pharma, med device, and all that, and on the healthcare side. And I'm like, do you understand the concept of this? And they're like, who else is doing it? And I'm like, oh, right? So it's like part of my job is to do that. And in the end, it's courage, right? But I think it's different now, because going back to the hardware appliance, I mean, you were investing if it was like an early adopter of Teradata, right? Like early adopters of Teradata as a hardware appliance to do data warehousing, was not in healthcare and life sciences, right? It was in media and financial services and what have you. There was a fear of a $2 million investment. You should not have fear now, right? You know, you can go get a Snowflake trial account for $400 in free credits, no credit card required. And you can do significant stuff with $400. Like you can establish an ROI for just about anything with that amount of money. That's the difference, right? So I think the learnings are, if you look at startups, I'll just do the blatant example. Startups in financial services, media, and just core tech, they do amazing things, right, on our platform with $400 in credits. We're not there yet. That's the inspiration should be, guys, like anybody can do it. I don't care what industry you're in. We should look at it that way. Now, I'm not saying you're going to go do clinical decision support, right? And you're going to build a model and you're going to go and remove the physician, the clinician in the loop. No, that's crazy. Right? That's nuts. Don't do that. But you can still do many, many things. So I think the learning is courage, right? We have to be a little more courageous with these newer technologies.
I love it. Any other questions? Making sure. Okay. I don't see any hands, but I will say thank you to everyone for joining us. Again, Todd and I came in here and said, we hope everyone leaves this room a little bit more excited about AI, a little bit more energized about AI being for everybody. Go home, talk to your kids about it, talk to your coworkers about it, and try to experiment. So we hope that you leave today feeling a little bit more energized about AI. And if you have any feedback, please scan the app and leave us some feedback. Have a great rest of the afternoon, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.